Claire Bennett had built her empire on one simple rule: show no weakness and never let anyone see you sweat. As CEO of Bennett Industries, she had crushed competitors and closed billion-dollar deals with ruthless precision. So when her company car pulled up that humid June morning, she barely glanced at the quiet black driver holding her door open. Just another face in the background, another employee whose name she'd never bothered to learn. But when a casual phone call revealed he spoke flawless Japanese, and Claire laughed it off as some cute anime hobby, she had no idea she was making the biggest mistake of her career. Because Daniel Carter wasn't a simple driver at all, and the Tokyo deal she was so confident about was about to become the most humiliating failure of her life, unless she could learn one impossible lesson: that the person you dismiss today might be the only one who can save you tomorrow. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The morning sun cast sharp shadows across the marble lobby of Bennett Industries headquarters in downtown Manhattan. Claire Bennett stood by the revolving glass doors, her Louboutin heels clicking impatiently against the polished floor. At 38, she had built a reputation as one of the most ruthless negotiators in international business. Her tailored charcoal suit spoke of power, and her expression radiated the kind of confidence that came from closing billion-dollar deals before most people finished their morning coffee. She checked her watch for the third time in 2 minutes. The car was late. Not by much, maybe 30 seconds. But in Claire's world, 30 seconds was an eternity. She scrolled through her phone, firing off rapid emails to her executive team, each message clipped and demanding. The subject lines alone could make junior associates break into a cold sweat. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Claire's jaw tightened slightly as she watched the driver step out to open her door. Daniel Carter moved with unhurried precision, his pressed uniform crisp despite the humid June morning. He was a tall black man in his early 30s, with a calm demeanor that seemed almost out of place in the frenetic energy of New York City. His eyes were steady and observant, taking in everything without appearing to stare. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett," Daniel said, his voice even and professional. Claire barely glanced at him as she slid into the back seat, already returning to her phone. "Airport, and step on it. I have a flight to catch." "Yes, ma'am. We'll be there with time to spare," Daniel replied, closing her door with a gentle click. As they merged into morning traffic, Claire spread her documents across the leather seat beside her. The Tokyo deal, the biggest negotiation of her career. Over $1 billion riding on her ability to convince a traditional Japanese manufacturing firm to partner with Bennett Industries. She had spent months preparing, studying market reports, analyzing profit margins, crafting the perfect aggressive pitch that would show them exactly why they needed her company. "You know what's funny about people?" Claire said suddenly, not really addressing Daniel, but speaking into the space between them. "Most of them think small. They settle for comfortable. A steady paycheck, a simple routine, go home at 5. She laughed, a sharp sound without much warmth. They never push themselves to be extraordinary. Daniel's eyes remained on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. "I suppose everyone has different definitions of extraordinary, ma'am." Claire looked up from her papers, finally registering his presence beyond a uniform and a job title. "I mean, take driving, for instance. It's a job, sure. Gets you from point A to point B. But it's not exactly changing the world, is it?" She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No offense, of course. I'm sure you're very good at what you do." "None taken," Daniel said quietly. "I'm about to close a deal that will create thousands of jobs, revolutionize supply chains across 3 continents, and generate enough revenue to fund entire communities." Claire's voice took on that practice cadence she used in boardrooms. "That's the kind of impact I'm talking about. The kind of work that matters." Daniel nodded slightly, his expression unchanged. "That sounds important." "Important," Claire let out a laugh. "It's everything. This deal with the Japanese firm, Sakura Technologies, it's going to put Bennett Industries on a completely different level. And I'm the one who's going to make it happen." She tapped her manicured nails against her phone screen. "My executive team is good, but let's be honest. this comes down to me. My vision, my negotiation skills. Traffic slowed as they approached the Midtown Tunnel. Daniel adjusted their route smoothly, his movements efficient and practiced. Claire barely noticed, too absorbed in rehearsing key phrases from her pitch under her breath. Daniel's phone buzzed in the cup holder. He glanced at the screen, then tapped his Bluetooth earpiece. Moshi Moshi, he said, his voice taking on a different quality, fluid, natural. Hi, wakamiya, sono ken nitsuit, roishu maid nishurui wo kurimazu. Claire's head snapped up. Her eyes widened as she watched Daniel continue the conversation in what was unmistakably fluent Japanese. His pronunciation was smooth, his tone respectful and measured. He spoke with the ease of someone who had lived the language, not just studied it. Domo arigatou gozaimasu. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Daniel ended the call and glanced in the rearview mirror, catching Claire's stare. For a moment, she was speechless. Then she recovered, her expression shifting from surprise to something like amused skepticism. Well, Claire said, leaning forward slightly. That was quite the performance. Let me guess, you watch a lot of anime? Maybe picked up some phrases from subtitles? She laughed, shaking her head. You play too much anime, huh? Daniel's expression remained neutral. I studied Japanese for several years, ma'am. That was a colleague confirming some documentation. Claire waved her hand dismissively. Sure. I mean, it's cute. Everyone needs a hobby, right? She returned to her papers, though her eyes weren't quite focusing on the words anymore. I'm sure it impresses people at parties or whatever. Daniel said nothing, his attention back on the road. But something in his silence felt heavier than words, though Claire was too absorbed in her own thoughts to notice. They pulled up to the departure terminal at JFK. Daniel moved around the car efficiently, retrieving Claire's luggage from the trunk. She was already striding toward the entrance, leaving him to follow with her bags. Just leave them with the porter, she called over her shoulder without turning around. Safe travels, Ms. Bennett, Daniel said. She didn't respond. 3 hours later, Claire stood in the glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of Bennett Industries, addressing her executive team. The skyline stretched behind her, a testament to the empire she had built. 7 people sat around the table. Her CFO, her chief operations officer, her head of international development, and 4 senior vice presidents who had learned long ago that meetings with Claire Bennett required full attention and no excuses. Let me be crystal clear, Claire said, pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. This deal with Sakura Technologies is not just important. It's essential. We're talking about a partnership that will give us manufacturing capacity in Asia, access to cutting-edge robotics technology, and a foothold in markets we've been trying to crack for 5 years. Marcus Green, her CFO, a stocky man with wire-rimmed glasses, nodded thoughtfully. The numbers look solid, Claire, but I want to raise a concern about the cultural approach. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. Cultural approach? The Japanese business culture is very different from ours. Marcus continued carefully. They value long-term relationships, formal protocols, indirect communication. Our research suggests that the aggressive pitch style you're planning might not land well with their executives. Claire crossed her arms. Marcus, I've closed deals in 17 countries. I know what I'm doing. These cultural consultants always make everything sound more complicated than it is. At the end of the day, business is business. You show them the numbers, demonstrate the value, and close the deal. That's universal. Jennifer Walsh, the head of international development, and one of the few people who occasionally pushed back on Claire's decisions, spoke up. With respect, Claire, we've had close calls before. Remember the Singapore negotiation last year? We almost lost that because of similar assumptions. Claire's smile was tight. We didn't lose it though, did we? We closed it, because I knew when to push and when to hold. She leaned forward, palms flat on the table. Look, I appreciate the concern, but I didn't get where I am by being timid. The Japanese executives are business people, just like us. They want profit, growth, market share. I'm going to give them a proposal that makes that impossible to refuse. The room fell silent. Everyone had learned that when Claire used that tone, the discussion was over. Now, Claire continued, straightening up, I want status updates on all the supporting documentation, financial projections, legal frameworks, integration timelines. Everything needs to be flawless when I walk into that boardroom in Tokyo. As the executives filed out an hour later, Marcus lingered near the door. He spoke quietly to Jennifer, unaware that his words carried in the empty room. She doesn't see it, Marcus said, shaking his head. Every time she bulldozes through cultural nuance, we barely scrape by. One of these days, it's going to cost us everything. Jennifer glanced back toward the conference room, where Claire was gathering her materials. Maybe Tokyo will be different. Maybe she'll surprise us. Or maybe, Marcus said grimly, Tokyo will surprise her. Outside the executive offices, in an employee lounge adjacent to the parking garage, Daniel sat in one of the plastic chairs, reading. His uniform jacket was draped neatly over the back of his seat, his white shirt still pristine despite the long morning. The book in his hands was a Japanese business magazine, Jokan Dongjingji, and he moved through the pages with the comfortable speed of native literacy. Another driver, Tommy Williams, a white man in his 50s who had worked for the company for 15 years, grabbed a coffee from the machine and sat down across from Daniel. Hey, Daniel, how was the morning run with Queen Ice? Tommy chuckled at his own nickname for Claire. Daniel looked up and smiled slightly. Uneventful. That's what you always say, man. Tommy, he shook his head. I don't know how you do it. Every time I've driven her, she's either on the phone tearing someone apart or making comments about how we're all just cogs in her machine. He took a sip of his coffee. Last month, she spent 20 minutes telling me how people who don't have ambition are wasting oxygen. I wanted to remind her that her ambition wouldn't get her anywhere without us oxygen wasters driving her around. Daniel closed his magazine and set it aside. She's under a lot of pressure. Big deal coming up. That's generous of you, Tommy said. Most people would call her what she is, an arrogant piece of work who thinks everyone below her executive floor is basically furniture. Daniel didn't disagree, but he didn't confirm it either. He had learned a long time ago that people revealed themselves through their actions, not through others' descriptions. And Claire Bennett had revealed quite a bit that morning. What Tommy didn't know, what nobody in the building knew, was that Daniel Carter hadn't always been a driver. 5 years ago, he had been someone else entirely. Someone who sat across from diplomats and executives, translating not just words but intentions. Someone who could walk into a room where 4 different languages were being spoken and find the common ground that everyone else had missed. He had been a linguist for International Bridge Solutions, a private firm that worked with NGOs, governments, and corporations to navigate complex international negotiations. He had learned languages not from textbooks, but from necessity, from spending months in communities recovering from conflict, from sitting with families who needed someone to help them be heard. Japanese in Tokyo and Osaka, Mandarin in Beijing and rural Sichuan, Arabic in Cairo and refugee camps in Jordan, Spanish in Mexico City and Buenos Aires, French in Paris and Dakar, German in Berlin, Portuguese in Lisbon and Sao Paulo, Italian in Rome, Korean in Seoul. 9 languages, each one a key to a different way of seeing the world. Then came the betrayal. A corporate partner had stolen the technology his small startup had developed, software that helped communities preserve their languages while integrating into global economies. The legal battle had drained everything. His savings, his reputation, his career. He had been left with skills that few understood and fewer valued, in a city where everyone wanted to know what you could do for them today, not what you had done yesterday. So he drove. He listened. He watched. And he kept his head down, because the world had taught him that standing up often meant getting knocked down harder. But old habits died hard. When he heard Claire on the phone that morning, scheduling calls with the Sakura executives, mispronouncing names, and using business Japanese phrases in contexts that would be considered borderline insulting, something in him had twitched. The same thing that used to wake him up at 3 in the morning during negotiations, the instinct that said this is going wrong, and someone needs to fix it. He pushed the thought away. It wasn't his problem anymore. He was just a driver. Tommy finished his coffee and stood up, stretching. Well, whatever. At least you get overtime for the airport runs. That's something. He clapped Daniel on the shoulder. Stay strong, brother. And if Queen Ice ever gets too much, you let me know. I'll drive her for a day and see if I can't remind her what karma looks like. Daniel smiled. I'll keep that in mind. After Tommy left, Daniel sat alone in the quiet lounge. On the wall-mounted television across the room, a news segment was playing with the volume low. The anchor was interviewing a business professor about corporate failures. And that's what we're seeing more and more, the professor was saying. Companies lose millions, sometimes billions, because they fail to understand that international business isn't just about contracts and spreadsheets. It's about people. It's about culture. The moment you treat a negotiation like a transaction instead of a relationship, you've already lost. The segment cut to footage of various failed corporate mergers, companies that had expanded too fast, executives who had promised the world and delivered nothing because they couldn't bridge the gap between different business cultures. Daniel watched for a moment, then turned away. He picked up his magazine again, but the words blurred on the page. He thought about Claire's laugh when she heard him speak Japanese. You play too much anime, huh? As if fluency was a trick, a performance, something to be dismissed with a joke. He had encountered that attitude before, more times than he could count. People who couldn't imagine that the quiet person in the corner might contain depths they had never bothered to explore. The truly remarkable thing wasn't that Claire was arrogant. Daniel had met plenty of arrogant people. It was that she was arrogant in a way that left her completely blind. She saw the world as a hierarchy where intelligence and capability lived at the top, and everything else was just background noise. Daniel had learned a different lesson. He had learned it in a village outside Aleppo, translating for a doctor who was trying to save lives with limited supplies. He had learned it in a boardroom in Shanghai, where the key to a successful negotiation wasn't the contract terms, but understanding the chairman's concerns about honoring his late father's legacy. He had learned it in countless small moments where the difference between success and failure was whether you bothered to listen. Arrogance closed ears. Humility opened them. His phone buzzed. Another message, this time in French, from a former colleague, now working with UNESCO. Daniel typed a quick response, his fingers moving easily across the keyboard, switching between languages as naturally as breathing. Somewhere above him, in her pristine office, Claire Bennett was probably rehearsing her pitch again, confident that her way was the only way. And in a few days, she would step into a boardroom in Tokyo, carrying all that confidence like armor. Daniel suspected that armor was about to crack. But that wasn't his problem. He was just a driver. He gathered his things, folded his magazine, and headed back to the parking garage. His shift wasn't over yet, and there were still miles to cover before the day was done. The departure lounge at JFK was a study in controlled chaos. Business travelers rushed between gates, rolling carry-ons, clicking against polished floors. Overhead announcements echoed in multiple languages, creating a constant low hum of urgent communication. Claire sat in the first-class waiting area, her laptop open, her phone on the armrest beside her, both devices demanding her attention simultaneously. She had declined the cultural advisor's final briefing. Again, the woman had sent 14 pages of notes about Japanese business etiquette, protocols for meetings, the importance of reading nonverbal cues. Claire had skimmed the first page and decided it was overthinking. She had her pitch memorized. She had her numbers ready. She had 17 years of successful negotiations behind her. What else did she need? Her phone rang. It was Jennifer Walsh. Claire, just checking in before you board. Did you review the cultural brief? Claire didn't look up from her laptop. Jennifer, I appreciate the concern, but I've got this. We're not going to win this deal by bowing and scraping. We're going to win it by showing them that we're the strongest partner they could possibly choose. I understand, but I'll call you when I land. Make sure the team has the revised projections ready for my review. Claire ended the call before Jennifer could respond. Around her, other passengers prepared to board. She noticed Daniel sitting 3 rows away, near the windows overlooking the tarmac. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't frantically typing on a laptop. He was reading a magazine, another Japanese publication, she noticed with a flicker of irritation, and he looked more relaxed than anyone else in the terminal. Of course he was relaxed. He wasn't carrying the weight of a billion-dollar deal on his shoulders. He was probably flying business class on the company dime, heading to Tokyo to drive her around, and his biggest concern was probably whether the hotel would have decent Wi-Fi. The thought annoyed her more than it should have. Maybe it was the way he had spoken Japanese that morning, so casual and fluent. Maybe it was the fact that he seemed unbothered by her dismissal of his skill. People usually responded when Claire Bennett put them in their place. They got defensive or apologetic or tried to prove themselves. Daniel had simply gone quiet, and somehow that felt like he had gotten the last word without saying anything at all. She shook off the thought. Focus. Tokyo. Sakura Technologies. CEO Takahashi and his board of directors. That was what mattered. The boarding call came. Claire gathered her things and moved to the priority line, flashing her first-class ticket. She didn't look back to see if Daniel was boarding. 8 hours into the flight, somewhere over the Pacific, Claire found herself unable to sleep despite the fully reclining seat and the exhaustion pulling at her. She had been rehearsing her opening statement in her mind for the 100th time, imagining the boardroom, the faces of the executives, the moment when she would make it clear that Bennett Industries wasn't asking for this partnership. They were offering an opportunity that Sakura couldn't afford to miss. Be aggressive. Be confident. Show no weakness. That was how you won. She got up to stretch her legs, walking toward the galley area where the flight attendants were preparing a meal service. As she approached, she heard raised voices. One of the attendants trying to communicate with an elderly Japanese passenger who seemed distressed. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I don't understand," the attendant was saying, her voice strained with frustration and concern. "Can you tell me what you need? Do you need medical attention?" The elderly man was speaking rapidly in Japanese, gesturing toward his bag in the overhead compartment. His face was flushed with embarrassment and worry. Other passengers were starting to notice the commotion. Claire watched from a few feet away, annoyed by the disruption. The attendant looked around, helplessly, clearly out of her depth. Then Daniel appeared from the economy section. He must have come forward when he heard the situation developing. He approached calmly, bowing slightly to the elderly man. "Soma Mason," Daniel said softly. "Do nasaimasu ka? Nanika o tetsudai dekiru koto ka arimasu ka?" The elderly man's expression shifted immediately from distress to relief. He responded in rapid Japanese, and Daniel listened intently, nodding. "Wakura Mishida," Daniel said. He turned to the flight attendant. "His medication is in his bag in the overhead bin." He was trying to ask for help retrieving it because his shoulder is injured and he can't reach up. He was worried about causing trouble. The attendant's face flooded with relief. "Oh, of course, absolutely. Which bag?" Daniel translated, helped identify the correct bag, and carefully retrieved it. He handed it to the elderly man with another small bow, speaking words that Claire couldn't understand, but that seemed to carry warmth and reassurance. The elderly man's eyes actually welled with tears as he thanked Daniel profusely. Daniel simply smiled, waved off the thanks, and returned to his seat as if nothing remarkable had happened. The flight attendant looked after him with obvious gratitude. Thank goodness he was here. I was about to call the cockpit. Claire returned to her seat, but her mind wasn't on her pitch anymore. She found herself replaying the scene, the easy way Daniel had diffused the tension, the respect in his voice and posture. The elderly man had gone from panic to peaceful in less than 2 minutes. That wasn't just speaking a language. That was understanding a culture deeply enough to know exactly how to make someone feel seen and safe. For the first time, a small crack appeared in Claire's certainty. Just a hairline fracture, barely noticeable. She pushed it away. So he was good with languages. That was fine. Nice even, but it didn't change anything. She was still the CEO. She was still the one who knew how to close deals. Language was just one tool, and she had plenty of other tools that mattered more. She reclined her seat and closed her eyes, forcing herself to sleep. But the image of Daniel's calm face and the elderly man's grateful tears lingered behind her eyelids. When they landed at Narita Airport, Tokyo greeted them with a wall of humidity and the organized efficiency that characterized everything Japanese. Claire moved through customs quickly, her executive status smoothing the way. Daniel followed at a distance, carrying his single bag and moving with that same unhurried grace. Outside the arrivals area, a small delegation from Sakura Technologies waited with a sign bearing the Bennett Industries logo. There were 3 people, 2 men in dark suits and a woman in a crisp business outfit. They stood with perfect posture, their expressions polite and reserved. Claire strode forward with her most confident smile. "Hello, Claire Bennett, CEO of Bennett Industries. It's great to finally meet you all in person." She extended her hand in a firm handshake, the kind that business magazines called power handshakes. The 3 Japanese executives bowed first, then shook her hand, but Claire could see the momentary hesitation, the slight discomfort in their eyes. She had gone straight for the handshake without bowing first, a minor breach in protocol that her cultural advisor would have flagged immediately. "Welcome to Japan, Ms. Bennett," the woman said in careful English. "I am Yuki Tanaka, assistant to CEO Takahashi. These are my colleagues, Mr. Ito and Mr. Suzuki." She gestured to the 2 men, who bowed again. Claire nodded briskly. "Wonderful. I'm eager to get started. We have a lot to accomplish in a short time." Ms. Tanaka's smile remained, but something in it cooled slightly. "Yes, we have prepared your accommodations and a schedule for your visit." Daniel approached from behind Claire, and when Ms. Tanaka's eyes landed on him, something shifted. He bowed, not dramatically, but with exactly the right depth and duration. "Hajimashite," he said quietly. "Daniel Carter Disu. Duzo Yoroshiku Onegai shimasu." All 3 Japanese executives' eyebrows rose slightly. Mr. Ito responded immediately in Japanese, his entire demeanor warming. "Oh, Nihongo ga yozu disune." Daniel smiled modestly. "Bankyuchu disu." He was saying his Japanese was still not good enough, that he was still studying, the polite deflection that showed cultural awareness more than any boast could. The exchange lasted only seconds, but Claire saw it clearly. The way the 3 executives leaned slightly toward Daniel, the way their formal masks dropped just a fraction, the way Mr. Suzuki said something that made Daniel laugh. A genuine, warm laugh that Claire had never heard from him before. Then they remembered themselves and turned back to Claire, professional masks sliding back into place. "Shall we proceed to your hotel?" Ms. Tanaka asked. The ride into central Tokyo was smooth and surreal. Claire stared out the window at the organized chaos of the city. Neon signs in kanji, impossibly clean streets, pedestrians moving with purpose. Everything felt simultaneously foreign and hyper-efficient. Ms. Tanaka sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally speaking with the driver in low Japanese. Claire sat in the back, trying to project confidence even though jet lag was starting to claw at her. Daniel had been placed in a separate car with Mr. Ito and Mr. Suzuki. Claire wondered what they were talking about. Probably nothing important. Small talk. Weather. Traffic. She didn't know that in the other car, Daniel was having a detailed conversation about Japanese manufacturing philosophy, the history of Sakura Technologies, and the late founder's vision for blending traditional craftsmanship with modern innovation. Mr. Ito was explaining, in Japanese, the deep concerns the board had about Western companies who saw partnerships as acquisitions in disguise. Daniel listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions, building bridges Claire didn't even know existed. At the hotel, a sleek high-rise in Roppongi, Claire barely noticed the elegance of the lobby or the meticulous service. She was already thinking about tomorrow's meeting, already running through her pitch again. Ms. Tanaka handed her a folder. "This is your itinerary. Tomorrow morning, we will have a traditional Japanese breakfast meeting with some of our board members. Then in the afternoon, the formal presentation to CEO Takahashi and the full board." "Traditional breakfast?" Claire's nose wrinkled slightly. "Is there a Western option? I usually just have coffee and maybe a croissant." Ms. Tanaka's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went flat. "Of course. We can arrange that." "Great. And I'd like to move the afternoon meeting up if possible. Get right to business. I think we're all eager to see the numbers." "The schedule is set according to Mr. Takahashi's preferences," Ms. Tanaka said carefully. "But I will convey your suggestion." Claire nodded, as if the matter was settled. That evening, Claire sat in her hotel room with papers spread across the desk, half-eaten room service beside her laptop. She video-called her executive team back in New York, where it was early morning. "We're in position," she told them. "Tomorrow's the big day. I'm going to walk in there and show them exactly why this partnership needs to happen." Marcus appeared on the screen, his expression cautious. "Claire, please remember what we talked about. These are relationship-focused negotiations. You can't just—" "Marcus, I appreciate the concern, but I know what I'm doing." Claire's tone made it clear the conversation was over. "Have those revised projections ready for me to reference. I'll call you after the meeting." She ended the call and stood at the window, looking out at the Tokyo skyline. Somewhere in this vast city was the Sakura Technologies headquarters, where a group of executives were probably preparing for tomorrow just as carefully as she was. She thought again about Daniel's fluent Japanese, the way the executives had responded to him. It didn't matter, she told herself. When they saw her presentation, when they understood the profit potential, the growth opportunities, the market dominance they could achieve together, that was what would close the deal. Not bowing and polite phrases. Business was business, no matter what language you spoke. But as she finally climbed into bed, exhaustion pulling her under, that hairline crack in her certainty widened just a little bit more. In another room, several floors below, Daniel sat by his window with a cup of green tea, reading through the materials Ms. Tanaka had quietly given him. Not officially, but with a meaningful look that suggested he might want to understand the context before tomorrow. The documents outlined Sakura Technologies' history, their values, their concerns about foreign partnerships. Between the lines, Daniel could read what wasn't being said. They were afraid. Afraid of being swallowed. Afraid of losing their identity. Afraid that Bennett Industries saw them as a stepping stone rather than a partner. And based on what he had seen so far, those fears were entirely justified. Daniel set down the documents and picked up his phone. A message in Mandarin from a former colleague. Another in Arabic from a contact at the UN. Another in French from a nonprofit director. The fragments of his old life, still reaching out across distances and differences. He responded to each one, his fingers moving across languages like a pianist across keys. Then he set the phone aside and looked out at the city lights. Tomorrow was going to be complicated. He could feel it the way he used to feel shifts in negotiations before they happened, that sixth sense that came from years of watching people talk past each other while thinking they were communicating. Claire was going to walk into that boardroom with all her confidence and none of her awareness. And the Sakura executives were going to smile politely and close the door at her face. Unless something changed. Daniel sipped his tea and said nothing to the empty room. He was just the driver. This wasn't his negotiation. It wasn't his problem to solve. But old habits died hard, and some instincts were impossible to ignore. He finished his tea and prepared for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would demand more than he had signed up for. The question was whether he was willing to step forward again, or whether staying quiet was the safer path. By morning, he would have his answer. The morning sun filtered through the shoji screens of the private dining room at Sakura Technologies headquarters. Claire sat awkwardly on a cushion at the low table, her business suit restrictive and uncomfortable in the traditional setting. The breakfast spread before her was elegant. Grilled fish, miso soup, pickled vegetables, perfectly seasoned rice. But she had barely touched it, nursing her requested coffee instead. Around the table sat 3 senior board members, including Ms. Tanaka. They ate with quiet dignity, occasionally making polite conversation in English about Tokyo's weather and the smoothness of Claire's flight. Claire smiled and nodded, checking her watch twice in 10 minutes. Daniel sat near the corner, his posture relaxed but attentive. He had accepted the traditional breakfast gratefully, and Claire noticed how the board member's eyes softened when he complimented the preparation in Japanese. He belonged here in a way she didn't, and that realization grated against her nerves. Ms. Bennett, one of the board members, Mr. Nakamura, said carefully, "We are honored that you have traveled so far to meet with us. Building trust takes time, yes." Claire set down her coffee cup with a decisive click. "Absolutely. And I think once you see our proposal, you'll understand why this partnership is the right move. Sometimes the best relationships are built on clear mutual benefit rather than prolonged deliberation." The translation hung in the air. Ms. Tanaka's smile remained fixed, but something behind her eyes shifted. Mr. Nakamura nodded slowly, though his expression suggested he had heard what Claire said beneath her words. Let's skip the relationship part and get to the contract. After breakfast, they moved to the main boardroom. It was a stunning space, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Tokyo, a long polished table that reflected the morning light, and walls displaying photographs of the company's 70-year history. Each image showed craftsmen, engineers, and workers side by side, a visual reminder that Sakura Technologies prided itself on honoring every person in the chain. Claire barely glanced at the photographs. She was already setting up her laptop, connecting to the presentation screen, arranging her materials with brisk efficiency. CEO Takahashi entered with 5 additional board members. He was a man in his late 60s with silver hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Everyone bowed. Claire nodded in return, a casual head bob that would have been appropriate for a colleague, not for the CEO of the company she was courting. Ms. Bennett, Takahashi said in measured English. Welcome. We are interested to hear your vision. Thank you, Mr. Takahashi. I promise you won't be disappointed. Claire launched into her presentation without preamble. Her pitch was exactly what it had been in her rehearsals. Aggressive, confident, filled with charts showing profit projections and market domination strategies. She spoke rapidly, using American business buzzwords: synergy, disruption, aggressive growth, fast-track integration. As you can see from these projections, we're looking at a 23% profit increase in the first fiscal year alone, Claire said, advancing to the next slide. But that's just the beginning. With Bennett Industries' distribution networks and your manufacturing capabilities, we'll be able to undercut competitors across 3 continents. She noticed that Mr. Takahashi had folded his arms. Around the table, several board members exchanged glances. But Claire pressed on, interpreting their silence as attentive interest rather than growing concern. Now, I know that traditional business models emphasize slow, steady growth, Claire continued, a hint of condescension creeping into her tone. But in today's global market, you can't afford to be cautious. You have to be willing to move fast, make bold decisions, and leave competitors in the dust. Ms. Tanaka leaned over to whisper something to the board member beside her. Claire didn't catch the Japanese words, but she saw the tight press of the woman's lips. At the back of the room, Daniel stood perfectly still. His face remained neutral, but his eyes tracked every micro-expression around the table. He understood what Claire couldn't see or refused to see. The folded arms, the lack of nodding, the way Mr. Takahashi's jaw tightened when Claire said fast-track integration. These weren't signs of people being persuaded. These were signs of people being offended. Claire clicked to her timeline slide. I'm proposing we move to contract signatures within 2 weeks. I know that might seem ambitious, but I believe in striking while the iron is hot. We can have legal teams drafting documents by Monday, initial integration planning by the end of the month, and full operational merger by Q3. Mr. Takahashi finally spoke. Ms. Bennett, may I ask a question? Of course. What is your understanding of Sakura Technologies' founding principles? Claire hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Well, you're known for quality manufacturing and technological innovation. That's exactly why we want to partner with you. And our employment philosophy? Takahashi's voice was quieter now, which somehow made it more pointed. I'm sure you have excellent workers. That's part of what makes you valuable. Around the table, the board members' expressions hardened. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, recognizing the moment when everything started to collapse. Takahashi leaned forward. Sakura Technologies was founded by my grandfather after the war. He believed that a company's strength comes not from how quickly it grows, but from how deeply it cares for its people. Every worker here is family. Every decision we make considers their lives, their children's futures, their dignity. That's admirable, Claire said, though her tone suggested she was humoring him. But with respect, sentiment doesn't show up on balance sheets. What matters is, she never finished the sentence. Mr. Nakamura spoke sharply in Japanese, his voice cutting across her words. Kanoyo wa watashi tahi no kahi wo mataku rikai shite inai. She doesn't understand our values at all. Daniel understood. So did everyone else in the room except Claire, who plowed forward, oblivious. What matters is creating shareholder value and market position, Claire continued. Look, I understand that you have traditions here. That's fine. But in a global partnership, you have to be willing to adapt to modern business practices. Sometimes that means making tough efficiency decisions. Sometimes that means streamlining operations that might feel important but don't contribute to the bottom line. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Another board member spoke in Japanese, his voice tight with controlled anger. Kore veo kyoruku yanai. Kore wa no torida. This isn't partnership. This is a takeover. Ms. Tanaka responded quietly. Takahashi-san and I Donna Hanisher was suru beki deho ka? What should we tell Mr. Takahashi? Before anyone could answer, Claire made her final, fatal mistake. She smiled, that confident boardroom warrior smile, and delivered what she thought was a winning closer. I know this is a lot to process, and I know it's different from how you usually do business. But trust me, in 5 years, you'll thank me for pushing you out of your comfort zone. Sometimes you need an outsider to show you what efficiency really looks like. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Takahashi stood slowly. The entire room stood with him. His voice, when he spoke, was perfectly polite and absolutely final. Ms. Bennett, we appreciate your time and your presentation. However, I do not believe our companies share the same vision for what partnership means. We will consider other opportunities. Claire blinked, confusion flickering across her face. Wait, I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly, Takahashi said. His English was suddenly flawless, each word precisely chosen. You see our company as an asset to acquire. We seek a partner who sees us as equals to respect. These are not the same thing. He bowed, a formal, distant bow, and walked out. The board members followed, their expressions ranging from disappointment to barely concealed anger. Within 2 minutes, the room was empty except for Claire, Ms. Tanaka, and Daniel. Claire stood frozen, her mouth slightly open. What just happened? Ms. Tanaka's professional mask was still in place, but her voice held an edge. You have been told what happened, Ms. Bennett. Our CEO has declined to pursue this partnership. But the numbers, did you see the projections? The profit potential is enormous. Money is not everything, Ms. Tanaka said quietly. And it is certainly not worth sacrificing our soul. She bowed, polite but cold, and left the room. Claire stared at the closed door, her mind racing. Then she whirled on Daniel, as if his presence was somehow connected to this disaster. Why didn't you say something? She snapped. You speak Japanese. Didn't you hear them getting upset? Daniel's expression remained calm, but something flickered in his eyes. Yes, ma'am. I heard everything. And you just stood there? You didn't ask for my input. Claire's face flushed with anger and humiliation. She gathered her materials with shaking hands, shoving papers into her briefcase. This is a disaster, an absolute disaster. They didn't even give me a chance to negotiate. Daniel said nothing, but the weight of his silence spoke volumes. The hotel suite felt smaller than it had the night before, as if the walls were closing in with Claire's panic. She paced between the window and the desk, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice climbing toward hysteria. Marcus, I need you to call them back. Set up another meeting. Tell them I was jet-lagged, that there was a misunderstanding. Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker, heavy with resignation. Claire, I've already tried. Ms. Tanaka was very polite and very firm. They're not interested in continuing discussions. That's ridiculous. Claire spun toward the window, staring out at Tokyo without seeing it. One bad meeting and they just give up? That's not how business works. It's how their business works, Marcus said quietly. And I warned you about this. Don't, Claire snapped. Don't you dare say I told you so right now. I'm not. I'm just stating facts. The board here is an emergency session. Our investors are getting nervous. Word travels fast, Claire. If Sakura publicly declines partnership with us, it sends a message to every other potential partner in Asia. We look like amateurs. Claire sank into the desk chair, her confidence finally cracking. What do I do? I don't know, Marcus said, and for the first time since she had known him, He sounded defeated. Maybe it's time to accept that this one is lost. She ended the call and sat in the growing darkness, too numb to turn on the lights. Hours passed. Her phone buzzed with increasingly urgent messages from board members, from investors, from the PR team trying to get ahead of the story. At some point, she heard her own voice crack as she left a voicemail for Jennifer Walsh. I don't understand what went wrong. I had the perfect pitch. The numbers were solid. They should have seen. Her voice broke. They should have seen that I was right. But they hadn't. And now everything was collapsing. Around 11 that night, there was a quiet knock on her door. Claire almost didn't answer, but something made her drag herself across the room and open it. Daniel stood in the hallway, still in his work clothes, his expression unreadable. "What do you want?" Claire's voice was hoarse from hours of phone calls and suppressed tears. "May I come in?" She almost said no, almost told him to go away, that she didn't need a driver offering sympathy or judgment. But something in his steady gaze stopped her. She stepped aside. Daniel entered and stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. "I heard you on the phone earlier. The walls here are thin." "Great. So you know what a disaster this is." "It doesn't have to be," Daniel said quietly. Claire laughed, a bitter sound. "They rejected us. They rejected me. How is that not a disaster?" "Because it's not over yet." She turned to stare at him. "What are you talking about?" Daniel pulled out his phone and showed her a message in Japanese. "This is from Mr. Ito, one of the executives you met yesterday. He contacted me this afternoon." Claire squinted at the screen. "I can't read that." He said that while the board was disappointed by the meeting, they were impressed by one thing: respect. And he said that if Bennett Industries had someone who truly understood respect, they might be willing to have an informal conversation. Not a negotiation, just a conversation. With who? You. With whoever is willing to listen instead of talk. Claire's mind raced. This was insane, letting her driver conduct business on behalf of the company. But the alternative was going home in defeat, watching her career implode, losing the deal that was supposed to define her legacy. "Why would you even want to help?" she asked. "I've been nothing but dismissive to you." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Because I've seen what happens when good opportunities die because of miscommunication. I've spent most of my adult life trying to prevent that." He paused. "And because despite everything, I think you actually care about this company. You're just going about it the wrong way." Claire bristled. "Don't psychoanalyze me." "I'm not. I'm offering a solution." Daniel met her eyes. "But there's a condition." "Of course there is. You have to let me do this my way. That means patience. That means humility. That means listening more than speaking. If you can't agree to that, then we're done here, and you should book your flight home." The words hung between them. Claire felt every instinct screaming at her to refuse, to reassert her authority, to remind this driver who was actually in charge. But another part of her, a part buried under years of armor and ambition, whispered that maybe, just maybe, she didn't know everything after all. "Fine," she said finally. "Do it your way. But if this works, I need to be in the room." "You'll be there," Daniel said, "but as an observer." "Can you do that?" Claire swallowed hard. "I'll try. That's all I'm asking." He left, and Claire stood alone in her suite, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. For the first time in her professional life, she was handing control to someone else. Someone she had mocked. Someone whose abilities she had dismissed. The irony wasn't lost on her. The next evening, Claire found herself in a small, traditional restaurant in a quiet neighborhood far from the business district. The space was intimate. Only 6 tables, warm wooden walls, soft lighting for paper lanterns. Mr. Ito and Mr. Suzuki were already seated when she and Daniel arrived. Daniel bowed deeply. Claire mimicked him, trying to match his angle and duration. The executives smiled slightly and gestured for them to sit. A server brought tea, and for the first 5 minutes, no one mentioned business at all. They talked about the restaurant's history, about the chef who had trained in Kyoto, about the changing seasons, and how autumn would soon bring beautiful colors to the parks. Claire sat silent, watching Daniel navigate the conversation with ease. He asked questions. He listened to the answers. He shared small observations about Tokyo that showed he had been paying attention, that he cared about the place and not just the transaction. Then, almost imperceptibly, the conversation shifted, Daniel-san, Mr. Ito said carefully. You understand our concerns, yes? I believe I do, Daniel replied in Japanese, then translated for Claire. They're worried about losing their identity, about being absorbed rather than partnered with. Mr. Suzuki spoke next, and Daniel translated. He's saying that they've seen it happen before. Western companies promise partnership, then slowly erase everything that made the Japanese company special. The workers become numbers. The traditions become inefficiencies to be eliminated. The soul disappears. Claire felt something tighten in her chest. Shame, maybe, or recognition. Daniel continued. He's asking if Bennett Industries can truly understand the difference between profit and purpose. This was the moment. Claire could feel it. Daniel turned to her, his eyes asking a silent question. What do you want to say? Claire took a breath. Every instinct told her to launch into reassurances, to make promises, to sell the vision. But Daniel's words echoed her mind. Listen more than speak. Can you tell them, Claire said slowly, that I don't have a perfect answer? That I came here thinking I understood business, but I'm realizing I didn't understand their business. Their values. Daniel translated. Both executives leaned forward slightly, surprise evident in their expressions. Claire continued, her voice quieter than usual. Tell them that I was wrong about a lot of things, and that if they're willing to teach me what partnership really means to them, I'm willing to learn. As Daniel translated, she watched the executives' faces carefully. She saw the skepticism, yes, but also something else, a crack in the door she had slammed shut with her arrogance. Mr. Ito spoke at length. Daniel listened, nodded, and then turned to Claire. He says that humility is the first step toward wisdom, and that wisdom is more valuable than speed. Daniel paused. He's willing to arrange a smaller meeting, not with Mr. Takahashi yet, but with some of the board members. A chance to start over, if you're truly willing to listen. Claire felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away quickly. Yes. Tell them yes. Please. As they left the restaurant an hour later, walking through the quiet streets back toward the main road, Claire spoke without looking at Daniel. I was wrong about you, she said. About who you are, what you're capable of. You didn't know, Daniel said simply. I should have asked instead of assumed. She stopped walking and turned to face him. Why did you become a driver? You're clearly capable of so much more. Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching a family cross the street in front of them. I was something else before. A linguist. A negotiator. I had a company, a career, a future. He smiled slightly, but there was pain in it. Then someone I trusted decided that my work was worth more to them than my partnership. They took everything. The idea, the clients, the reputation. By the time I could fight back, I had nothing left. I'm sorry, Claire said, and meant it. I learned something from that loss, Daniel continued. I learned that titles and positions don't define capability. That sometimes the people who look the most ordinary are carrying the most extraordinary stories. And that respect costs nothing but means everything. They walked in silence for a while. Then Claire spoke again. Will you help me learn? Really learn, not just fake it. Daniel looked at her carefully, weighing something behind his eyes. Then he nodded. I'll help, but you have to promise me something. What? That you'll apply what you learned to more than just this deal. That you'll treat the people back home, all the people, with the same respect you're about to show these executives. Claire thought about Tommy and the other drivers, about the assistants she barely acknowledged, about everyone she had dismissed as less important than herself. I promise, she said. And this time, standing in a foreign city with her pride in ruins and her assumptions shattered, she actually meant it. Above them, the Tokyo lights glowed against the night sky. Somewhere in this vast city, a door that had been closed was opening again, just a crack. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The intimate restaurant meeting had ended with cautious optimism, but morning brought a new complication. Claire stood in the hotel lobby, staring at her phone as Jennifer's urgent message scrolled across the screen. Atlas Dynamics just announced they're sending a team to Tokyo. Victor Hale himself is coming. They know about Sakura. Claire's stomach dropped. Victor Hale. The name alone carried weight in international business circles. A smooth-talking CEO, known for aggressive acquisitions, disguised as partnerships. If Atlas was circling, it meant they smelled blood in the water. Daniel appeared beside her, 2 coffees in hand. He offered her one without a word. Atlas Dynamics is coming, Claire said, her voice tight. They're going to try to steal this deal. Daniel sipped his coffee calmly. I know. Mr. Ito warned me last night. And you didn't think to mention it? You were processing enough already. Daniel's tone was gentle but firm. Besides, competition isn't always a bad thing. It might motivate Sakura to make a decision faster. Or it might give them a better option, Claire countered. Only if we give them reason to take it. Before Claire could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Ms. Tanaka. Informal discussion, 2 p.m. today. Small group. Please bring Daniel-san. Claire showed Daniel the message. He nodded slowly. That's sooner than I expected. They're testing us. Testing what? Whether your humility from last night was real or strategic. The question hung between them. Claire wanted to insist it was real, but even she wasn't entirely sure yet. Old habits were hard to break, and 24 hours wasn't enough time to rewire decades of behavior. The meeting took place in a conference room much smaller than the original boardroom. Intimate, with a round table instead of a rectangular one. The symbolism wasn't lost on Claire. No head of the table. No power positions. Just people in a circle. 4 executives sat waiting. Ms. Tanaka, Mr. Ito, Mr. Suzuki, and a woman Claire hadn't met before. Ms. Sato, who Daniel quietly identified as the senior advisor to CEO Takahashi. Daniel bowed deeply. Claire matched him, holding the bow for the appropriate length of time. When they sat, Claire noticed that Daniel had positioned himself between her and the executives. Not as a barrier, but as a bridge. Ms. Sato spoke first, her English precise but accented. Ms. Bennett, we appreciate your willingness to meet again. Daniel-san has spoken well of your company's potential. But we have concerns. I understand, Claire said, forcing herself to speak slowly, to listen rather than prepare her next argument. What concerns can I address? Ms. Sato exchanged glances with the others. Then she did something unexpected. She switched to Japanese. Daniel listened intently as she spoke at length, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he turned to Claire. She's asking about employment guarantees. Their biggest fear is that a merger will lead to layoffs. In their culture, letting go of employees is a last resort, not a business strategy. She wants to know if Bennett Industries understands that workers are family, not expenses to be optimized. Claire felt the weight of the question. Back home, efficiency often meant restructuring. It meant cutting redundancy. It meant, she had to admit, treating people like numbers. Tell her, Claire said slowly, that I'm learning the difference between efficiency and cruelty, and that I'm willing to write employment protections into any agreement, with enforcement mechanisms they control. As Daniel translated, Ms. Sato's eyebrows rose slightly. Mr. Ito leaned forward, interested now. Then Mr. Suzuki spoke, but not in Japanese. He switched to Mandarin, his words rapid and testing. Daniel didn't miss a beat. He responded in fluent Mandarin, his tone matching Mr. Suzuki's formality. The conversation flowed for several exchanges before Daniel paused to translate for Claire. He switched languages to test whether we're flexible or rigid. He's asking about supply chain integration, specifically how we'd handle their existing partnerships with Chinese manufacturers. He wants to know if we'd force them to break long-standing relationships for cheaper alternatives. Claire remembered the consultant reports sitting unread in her briefcase, the ones recommending exactly that, cutting existing vendors for maximum profit margin. She had planned to present those recommendations as smart business. Now, they felt like a betrayal waiting to happen. Tell him we'd honor existing relationships, Claire said. Tell him we understand that trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy, and that we're not interested in destroying anything. As Daniel translated back into Mandarin, she saw Mr. Suzuki's posture shift slightly, less defensive, more open. The meeting continued for 2 hours. Each executive probed different aspects of the potential partnership, and each time, they switched languages, testing, challenging, trying to find the cracks in the facade. Ms. Tanaka spoke in Korean about distribution concerns. Daniel answered smoothly, explaining logistics in a way that honored existing systems rather than dismantling them. Mr. Ito shifted to German when discussing technical specifications and patent sharing. Daniel's German was precise and formal, addressing concerns about intellectual property theft with concrete proposals for co-ownership structures. At one point, a consultant joined via video call from Dubai, speaking Arabic. Claire watched in amazement as Daniel pivoted seamlessly, discussing data privacy and regional compliance issues with the same fluency he had shown in every other language. Between translations, Daniel always brought Claire into the conversation, never speaking over her or around her. He was a bridge, not a replacement. When the consultant mentioned concerns about European Union regulations, Daniel surprised everyone by addressing them in Italian to another participant who had joined the call, a design contractor worried about being sidelined. 7 languages in 2 hours, each one deployed with precision and cultural awareness, each one building trust that Claire's aggressive pitch had demolished. As the meeting finally wound down, Ms. Sato spoke again, this time in English, directed at Claire. "You have an unusual driver, Ms. Bennett." Claire looked at Daniel, then back at Ms. Sato. "I'm beginning to realize he's not really a driver at all. I just didn't have the wisdom to see what he actually was." Ms. Sato smiled, the first genuine smile Claire had seen from her. Wisdom often comes from humility. Perhaps there is hope for this partnership after all. As they left the building, Claire's phone exploded with messages. Marcus, Jennifer, the board, all reporting the same thing. Atlas Dynamics had announced a press conference in Tokyo, claiming they were in advanced discussions with Sakura Technologies. "They're bluffing," Daniel said, reading over her shoulder. "Sakura hasn't met with them yet." "How do you know?" "Because Ms. Sato told me." In Japanese. "While you were reviewing the documents." Claire stopped walking. "What else did she tell you?" "That they're impressed by your willingness to change. But that one good meeting isn't enough. They need to see consistency." Daniel paused. "And she warned me that Atlas is bringing a celebrity polyglot consultant, someone who speaks multiple Asian languages. They're planning to make a show of cultural sensitivity. So we're in a competition." "We're in a relationship," Daniel corrected. "Atlas will try to make it a competition. Our job is to keep it a relationship." Victor Hale arrived in Tokyo like a hurricane wearing a designer suit. Beside him walked Dr. Lin Zhang, the polyglot consultant Atlas had brought, a woman renowned for speaking 7 Asian languages and known for her cultural expertise. Claire's stomach tightened. 7 languages was impressive. But Daniel spoke 9. "He's setting a trap," Daniel said quietly, watching the same footage on his tablet. "What kind of trap?" "The public kind. He's going to make this about spectacle. Who looks more culturally aware, who can make the better show of respect. He wants to turn partnership into performance." Claire set down her coffee cup. "So what do? We ignore him. We keep building the relationship we started. Quietly. Authentically." Daniel looked at her seriously. "This is where your patience gets tested. Every instinct will tell you to fight back publicly, to match his press conferences, to compete. But that's not how you win in Japanese business culture. So we just let him control the narrative. We let our actions control the narrative." An hour later, Claire's resolve was tested when her phone rang. It was the CFO from Bennett Industries headquarters, his voice sharp with panic. "Claire, our stock dropped 2% this morning. Atlas is telling investors that we've lost the Sakura deal. They're positioning themselves as the stable alternative. The board is demanding that you make a counterstatement, offer better terms, match whatever Atlas proposes." "No," Claire said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Silence on the other end. "Excuse me. Tell the board that we're not playing that game. We're building a partnership based on trust, not a bidding war based on ego. If that costs us in the short term, so be it." "Claire, they're talking about forcing a vote, about replacing you." The words hit like ice water. Everything she had built, her entire career, potentially gone because she was choosing patience over aggression. She looked at Daniel, who was watching her carefully. "Tell them," Claire said slowly, "that if they want someone who will burn bridges to win battles, they should replace me. But if they want someone who will build relationships that last, they need to give me time to do this right. After she hung up, her hand was shaking. Daniel handed her a glass of water. That was brave, he said. That was terrifying. Same thing, sometimes. The next morning, Claire received an unexpected message from Ms. Sato, an invitation to visit a traditional tea house where Sakura Technologies hosted important guests. The message emphasized that this was not a business meeting, just an opportunity to learn about Japanese traditions. Daniel smiled when Claire showed him the invitation. This is good. They're teaching you, not testing you. The tea house was tucked away in a quiet district, surrounded by carefully tended gardens. Inside, the space was serene, bamboo mats, sliding paper doors, and a subtle scent of incense. Ms. Sato greeted them wearing a kimono, her usual business formality replaced with gracious warmth. Thank you for accepting my invitation, Ms. Bennett. I thought you might appreciate understanding why we value what we value. For the next 2 hours, Ms. Sato taught Claire about the tea ceremony. Not the mechanics, but the philosophy. Every gesture had meaning. Every pause had purpose. The ritual wasn't about the tea itself, but about the respect shown between host and guest, the mindfulness brought to each moment, the acknowledgement that relationships were built one careful action at a time. Claire found herself thinking about her usual approach to business. The rushed meetings, the interrupted conversations, the constant multitasking. She had treated every interaction as a transaction to complete, not a relationship to nurture. As they sat in silence after the ceremony, Ms. Sato spoke quietly. My grandfather founded Sakura Technologies after losing everything in the war. He could have chased profit desperately. Instead, he chose to build slowly, to honor his workers, to make quality the priority over speed. It took 15 years before the company was truly profitable. But 70 years later, we still exist because of those choices. And you're worried that partnering with us will undo all of that, Claire said. Yes. Ms. Sato met her eyes. We have been approached by many Western companies. They all promise respect. But within months, the promises fade and the pressure to change everything begins. We would rather stay small and true to ourselves than become large and unrecognizable. Claire understood then what she hadn't before. This wasn't about money or market share. It was about survival of identity. What would make you trust that we're different? Claire asked. Ms. Sato considered the question carefully. Atlas Dynamics contacted us yesterday. They offered very generous financial terms. They also offered speed, contracts within days, integration within months. It was everything you initially promised, but with more money attached. Claire's chest tightened, and it felt hollow, like they were trying to buy our yes before we could think carefully about our no. Ms. Sato paused. Then I heard what you told your board, that you would rather build slowly than burn quickly. That is not something Atlas would say. You heard that. Mr. Ito has friends in many places. Ms. Sato smiled slightly. In business, nothing is truly private. As Claire and Daniel left the tea house, they found a small crowd of reporters waiting outside. Someone must have tipped them off about the meeting. Cameras flashed. Questions were shouted in English and Japanese. Ms. Bennett, is it true Atlas is offering better terms? Are you prepared to match their financial proposal? What makes Bennett Industries different from Atlas Dynamics? Claire froze, every instinct screaming at her to defend herself, to make bold claims, to fight for dominance. But Daniel's hand touched her elbow gently, a reminder. She took a breath and spoke calmly. We're not here to compete with anyone. We're here to learn what partnership means to Sakura Technologies. If that takes longer than others are willing to wait, then we're the right partner. If they prefer speed and money, there are other options available. More questions were shouted, but Daniel and Claire walked past without engaging further. Later that evening, video of her brief statement went viral in Japanese business circles. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was unusual. An American CEO admitting that patience mattered more than winning. That night, Claire received an email marked urgent from Marcus. Emergency board meeting in 48 hours. They're voting on your future. Get home now. She stared at the message for a long time. Going home meant abandoning everything they had built. Staying meant risking everything she had been. She forwarded the message to Daniel with a single question: "What would you do?" His response came quickly: "I'd ask what matters more, your title or your integrity." Claire sat alone in her hotel room, watching the lights of Tokyo blur through tears she didn't want to shed. For the first time in her career, she genuinely didn't know what came next. Her phone buzzed one more time. A message from Ms. Sato in simple English: "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what is right despite fear. Your grandfather's tea ceremony taught me that. Thank you for listening today." Claire read the message 3 times. Then she typed a response to Marcus: "Tell the board I'll be there in 48 hours. But I'm finishing what I started here first. If they want to replace me, they can do it after I've done this right." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Outside, Tokyo hummed with life. Somewhere in this city, Victor Hale was probably planning his next move, his next play for dominance. But Claire was finally learning that some battles were won not by fighting harder, but by becoming someone worth trusting. And trust, she was discovering, was built one quiet choice at a time. The morning light filtered through Claire's hotel room curtains, bringing with it a sense of finality. In 48 hours, she would either have a job or be looking for one. The board meeting loomed like a storm cloud, but strangely, Claire felt calmer than she had in weeks. Maybe it was clarity, maybe it was resignation, or maybe it was the first time in her career she was making decisions based on what was right rather than what was safe. Her phone buzzed. An email from David Park, her head of security, a methodical man who never sent messages without purpose. "Claire, thought you should see this before anyone else does. Background check on Daniel Carter finally came through. You need to read this. Call me when you can." Attached was a file marked confidential. Claire opened it and began reading. With each paragraph, her understanding of Daniel shifted and expanded like a photograph coming into focus. Daniel James Carter, born in Detroit to a teacher and a factory worker, studied linguistics at Georgetown on a full scholarship, graduated top of his class, immediately recruited by International Bridge Solutions, a private firm specializing in conflict mediation and cross-cultural negotiation. The file detailed his career, work in post-conflict zones across the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, letters of commendation from UN officials, a recommendation from a State Department liaison describing him as the most gifted cultural translator I've encountered in 30 years of diplomatic service. Then came the part that made Claire's chest tighten. 5 years ago, Daniel had founded a startup called LinguaConnect, software designed to help displaced communities preserve their languages while integrating into new economies. The technology used AI to create real-time translation tools that respected cultural nuance, not just literal meaning. It was revolutionary. His partner in the venture was a company called Atlas Dynamics. Claire's blood ran cold. She read the next section twice to make sure she understood. Atlas had initially invested in LinguaConnect as a minority partner. Then, according to legal filings, they had systematically stolen the core technology, rebranded it as their own product, and frozen Daniel out through a combination of contract manipulation and sheer legal firepower. The lawsuit had dragged on for 2 years, draining Daniel's resources until he couldn't afford to continue fighting. Atlas Dynamics had destroyed him, and Victor Hale had been CEO at the time. The file included a final note. Subject relocated to New York, took employment as a driver to maintain income while completing debt repayment. No criminal record. References describe him as brilliant but unwilling to self-promote. Psychological evaluation suggests trauma from professional betrayal, but no indication of instability or revenge motivation. Claire set down her phone, her hands trembling slightly. Daniel had been in the same room with representatives from the company that had destroyed his life, and he had never once mentioned it. He had helped Claire, guided her, put aside his own pain to salvage a deal that could benefit the very people who had ruined him. She called David immediately. "You read it." David's voice was gruff. "Why didn't this come through earlier?" He sealed most of the court records. Took some digging. "Claire, you need to be careful here. The man has every reason to sabotage this deal, given Atlas's involvement." "He won't," Claire said with certainty she couldn't fully explain. "How do you know?" Because he's not driven by revenge. He's driven by something better. She paused. Thank you for the file, David. But I need to go. She found Daniel in the hotel's small business center, reviewing documents on his laptop. He looked up when she approached, his expression neutral, but his eyes showing a flicker of knowing, as if he had been expecting this conversation. You know about Atlas, Claire said quietly, sitting across from him. You've known the whole time. Daniel closed his laptop slowly. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't relevant to what you needed to accomplish. Claire leaned forward. Daniel, they destroyed you. They stole everything you built. And you're helping me negotiate a deal where they're the competition? How is that not relevant? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain carefully contained. 5 years ago, I believed that good work spoke for itself. That if you built something valuable and treated people fairly, the system would protect you. He smiled without humor. I was wrong. Alice saw an opportunity and took it. They had better lawyers, more money, and no conscience. I learned that the world doesn't always reward good intentions. So why are you here? Why help me with any of this? Because I also learned that bitterness is a poison you drink yourself. I could spend my life trying to hurt Atlas, or I could spend it trying to build something better. Daniel met her eyes. When I started driving for Bennett Industries, I was just trying to survive. But when I saw you preparing for this deal, I recognized something. You had the passion and the resources to make a real difference. You just didn't have the wisdom yet. And you thought you could teach me? I thought maybe we could teach each other. He paused. You needed to learn humility. I needed to remember that not everyone in power is corrupt, that some people can change. Claire felt tears pricking her eyes and blinked them away. I was so arrogant. The way I treated you, the way I dismissed. You were, Daniel agreed, but his tone was gentle. But you're not that person anymore. Or at least, you're choosing not to be. What happened to you wasn't fair. No, it wasn't. But fairness is a luxury. Integrity is a choice. Daniel opened his laptop again. And right now, we have a choice to make. Atlas is holding a press conference in 3 hours. They're going to announce a formal proposal to Sakura. Aggressive terms, fast timeline, major PR push. We need to decide how to respond. Claire thought about the old version of herself, the one who would have scheduled a competing press conference, who would have tried to outpromise and outmaneuver Atlas at every turn. We don't respond, she said finally. We keep building the relationship we started. Let Atlas make noise. We'll make trust. Daniel smiled. A real smile this time, one that reaches eyes. Now you're learning. There's something else, Claire said. I want to create a new position at Bennett Industries. Chief Cultural and Linguistic Strategist. Real authority, real budget. I want you to take it. Daniel started to shake his head, but Claire continued. I'm not offering this out of guilt or sympathy. I'm offering it because you're the most qualified person I've ever met for a role we desperately need. And because if the board votes me out in 2 days, whoever replaces me should have you there to keep them honest. You really think they might remove you? Honestly, I don't know. But if they do, I'll know I went down doing the right thing. Claire stood. Think about the offer. We can discuss details later. Right now, I need you to help me prepare for whatever comes next. Victor Hale's press conference was everything Daniel had predicted. Polished, aggressive, and designed to corner Sakura Technologies into a quick decision. Claire and Daniel watched it on the hotel television, along with what seemed like half of Tokyo's business community. Atlas Dynamics is proud to offer Sakura Technologies a partnership built on respect, efficiency, and mutual prosperity, Victor announced, his silver hair gleaming under the camera lights. Dr. Lin Zhang stood beside him, nodding solemnly. We understand that Japanese business culture values tradition. That's why we've assembled a team that speaks your language, literally and figuratively. Dr. Zhang stepped forward and delivered a flawless statement in Japanese, then switched to Mandarin, then Korean. The reporters murmured appreciatively. The message was clear. Atlas understood cultural sensitivity, and they had the expertise to prove it. We're prepared to offer a 25% premium over any competing bid, Victor continued. We're ready to sign contracts within 1 week, and we guarantee no layoffs for the first 18 months. This is a partnership built on speed, certainty, and generosity. Claire's phone exploded with messages. Her board members demanding she match the offer. Investors panicking about being outbid. The PR team asking for a counterstatement. She silenced the phone and looked at Daniel. "Tell me we're doing the right thing by not responding." "We're doing the right thing," Daniel said calmly. "Victor is offering them money and promises. We're offering them something harder to quantify, but more valuable, genuine partnership. The question is whether they can see the difference." An hour later, they received an unexpected message from Mr. Ito. "Emergency meeting requested by CEO Takahashi. All stakeholders. This afternoon. Your presence is expected." Claire's stomach nodded. "All stakeholders means Atlas will be there." "Probably," Daniel agreed. "They're forcing a decision point. Comparing proposals side by side. Can we win that kind of competition?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "Not if it's about money or promises, but if it's about trust and understanding. Maybe, if we handle it right." The meeting room at Sakura Technologies headquarters was larger than the intimate spaces they had occupied before. A long conference table was set with formal place cards. CEO Takahashi sat at the head, flanked by his full board, 8 executives total. To his right sat Victor Hale and Dr. Zhang, looking confident and prepared. To his left, 2 empty chairs waited for Claire and Daniel. As they entered, Victor's eyes locked on Daniel. Something flickered in his expression, recognition, surprise, and then quick calculation. He knew who Daniel was, and Daniel knew that he knew. "Ah, Ms. Bennett," Victor said smoothly, standing to shake her hand. "How lovely to finally meet. I've heard such interesting things about your unconventional approach to this negotiation." The word unconventional dripped with condescension. Claire shook his hand firmly, but said nothing. Daniel nodded politely, but maintained careful distance. CEO Takahashi spoke, his voice measured and authoritative. "Thank you both for coming on short notice. Atlas Dynamics has made us a generous offer. We wanted to give Bennett Industries an opportunity to present their proposal in the same setting. Fairness demands we hear both visions before making our decision." Victor smiled confidently. "Of course, transparency is essential." Takahashi turned to Claire. "Ms. Bennett, please begin." Claire stood, but instead of moving to the presentation screen, she remained at her seat. "Mr. Takahashi, members of the board, I don't have a counteroffer that matches Atlas's financial terms. I can't promise speed or guarantee outcomes in artificial timelines." Around the table, several executives exchanged concerned glances. Victor's smile widened slightly. "What I can offer," Claire continued, "is honesty. When I first came to Tokyo, I treated this negotiation like a transaction. I was arrogant. I was dismissive of your culture and values. I failed spectacularly, and I deserve that failure." Takahashi's expression remained unreadable, but he was listening intently. "Then I learned something. I learned that partnership isn't about who offers more money or moves faster. It's about who understands what matters to you and respects it enough to protect it." Claire gestured to Daniel. "My colleague here taught me that, and he taught me it by demonstrating something I'd forgotten. That listening is more powerful than speaking, and that humility opens more doors than aggression." She sat down. The room was silent. Victor cleared his throat. "That's quite touching, Ms. Bennett. But sentiment doesn't pay salaries or fund innovation. Our offer includes concrete guarantees, immediate capital infusion, and proven expertise." He nodded to Dr. Zhang. "My colleague here speaks 7 Asian languages and has facilitated partnerships across this region for 15 years. We're not amateurs playing at cultural sensitivity." Dr. Zhang stood and began speaking in elegant Japanese, outlining their proposal with impressive fluency. Then she shifted to Mandarin, addressing specific concerns about Chinese supply chains. She was good. Claire could see it in the executives' faces. When Dr. Zhang finished, she sat down with quiet confidence. Takahashi turned to Daniel. "Daniel-san, you have been quiet. Do you have anything to add to your CEO's statement?" Daniel stood slowly. "If I may, Mr. Takahashi, I'd like to address some concerns that have been raised in languages perhaps not everyone has spoken yet. Takahashi's eyebrows rose slightly. Please proceed. Daniel turned to face the full room. I understand that Sakura Technologies has partners and stakeholders from many countries. I've heard whispers of concerns that haven't been voiced in these formal settings. Concerns about supply chains, about data sovereignty, about cultural preservation, about whether any Western company can truly understand what you've built here. He switched to Korean, addressing one executive directly. The man's eyes widened as Daniel spoke with native-level fluency about distribution concerns specific to the Korean peninsula, fears about port access and tariff instability that no one had mentioned in English or Japanese. The executive responded in Korean, surprised and engaged. Daniel listened, nodded, and offered solutions that showed deep understanding of regional politics. Then Daniel pivoted to German, speaking to an engineer who had been silent all meeting. He discussed patent protections and co-development structures in technical language that bridged legal and engineering concerns. The engineer leaned forward, asking detailed questions. Daniel answered each one precisely. A video screen flickered to life, partners calling in from other regions. Daniel addressed each one in their native language. To the Gulf representative joining by video, he spoke Arabic, formal and respectful, discussing data residency concerns and sovereignty protections. He proposed region-specific data architectures that would keep information under local control. To the Brazilian logistics partner, he switched to Portuguese, outlining shipping route redundancies and long-term price stabilization that protected against market volatility. To the Spanish distribution coordinator, he spoke Castilian Spanish, proposing a co-branding initiative that honored European aesthetic traditions while leveraging Japanese manufacturing excellence. To the Italian design consultant, he delivered a passionate pitch in Italian about preserving artisan quality while scaling production, tradition meeting innovation without compromising either. Back in the room, another video connection appeared, a French manufacturing advisor who had been silent until now. Daniel greeted him in flawless French, discussing environmental compliance and sustainability standards that exceeded minimum requirements. And finally, addressing a concern that Ms. Sato had mentioned privately, Daniel spoke in Japanese again. But this time, he included phrases from Ryukyuan dialect, acknowledging the Okinawan heritage of one board member and the historical craftsmanship traditions that had been nearly lost, but that Sakura had worked to preserve. The room was completely silent. Even Victor had stopped smiling. 9 languages, 9 different stakeholder concerns, each one addressed with precision and cultural awareness that went far beyond memorized phrases. Claire realized she was holding her breath. CEO Takahashi spoke slowly in Japanese. Daniel translated for Claire. He's asking if you knew I could do this. Yes, Claire said simply. And I brought him because these conversations matter more than my ego. Takahashi switched to English. Mr. Hale, your consultant speaks 7 languages. That is impressive, but speaking and understanding are different things, yes? Victor's jaw tightened. With respect, CEO Takahashi, linguistic parlor tricks are interesting, but ultimately superficial. What matters is the contract. What matters, Takahashi interrupted quietly, is trust. And trust is demonstrated through understanding. He looked at Daniel. You understood things that were never spoken in English. Concerns that people were afraid to voice because they thought no one would comprehend. That is not a parlor trick. That is rare wisdom. Victor's face flushed slightly. He tried to recover. Of course, we value understanding. But let's not forget the financial realities. Ms. Sato cut him off with a sharp question in Japanese. Victor looked to Dr. Zhang to translate, but Daniel was faster. She's asking if Atlas Dynamics was involved in a lawsuit 5 years ago with a company called LinguaConnect, Daniel said quietly. She wants to know if Atlas stole technology from a small startup and bankrupted the founder. The room went deadly silent. Victor's composure cracked. That's a completely inappropriate question. That matter was resolved legally. You stole his work, Ms. Sato said in English, her voice like ice. She pointed at Daniel. You destroyed this man's company and then came here to offer us partnership. You speak of trust, but you are built on theft. Now wait just a minute. Victor started to rise. Sit down, Takahashi said, his voice cutting like a blade. Victor sat. Takahashi turned to Daniel. Is this true? Yes, sir, Daniel said calmly. But I didn't come here for revenge. I came here to help Ms. Bennett learn to do business the right way. Whatever happens between Sakura and Atlas is your decision, not mine. But you have every reason to sabotage them, Takahashi observed. I do, Daniel agreed. But sabotage requires dishonesty. I prefer to let the truth speak for itself. Takahashi studied Daniel for a long moment, then turned to Claire. You brought him knowing his history. I learned about it this morning, Claire admitted. But even if I'd known from the start, I would have brought him. Because he's the best person for this job, and because he understands something I'm still learning. That integrity matters more than victory. Victor stood abruptly. This is a witch hunt. I came here with a legitimate business proposal. Built on stolen foundation, Mr. Ito said quietly in English. We looked into your company when you announced your interest. We know about Lingua Connect. We know about 3 other small companies Atlas acquired through similar methods. We know who you are, Mr. Hale. Victor's face went from red to pale. You've made your position clear. Dr. Zhang and I will show ourselves out. As they left, the room remained tense. Claire didn't feel triumphant, just exhausted and uncertain. Takahashi stood, and everyone in the room stood with him. We will deliberate, he said simply. Both parties will hear our decision tomorrow. Thank you for your presentations. Outside the building, Claire leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly shaky. Did that just happen? It happened, Daniel confirmed. Did we win? I don't know, Daniel said honestly, but we told the truth. That's all we could do. Claire's phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Board meeting moved up. They want you home tonight. They're voting tomorrow morning. She showed Daniel the message. He nodded slowly. You need to go. But the decision from Sakura. I'll be here for it. You need to fight for your job. Daniel smiled slightly. I'll call you as soon as I know anything. Claire looked at him. This man who had saved her from herself, who had taught her more in 1 week than she'd learned in 20 years of business school and boardrooms. Thank you, she said, for everything, for being patient with someone who didn't deserve it. You're welcome, Daniel said. Now go. And remember, humility isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing you can bring to that boardroom. As Claire's car pulled away toward the airport, Daniel stood alone on the Tokyo street, watching the city lights begin to glow in the gathering dusk. Tomorrow would bring answers. But tonight, he had done what he came to do. He had helped someone find their better self. And in the process, he had found a piece of his own. The Bennett Industries boardroom felt colder than Claire remembered, or maybe it was just that Tokyo had warmed her in ways she hadn't expected. She stood at the head of the long mahogany table, facing 12 board members whose expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. These were people who had once celebrated her ruthlessness, who had promoted her precisely because she won at any cost. Now, they were questioning whether that same ruthlessness had finally cost them everything. Marcus sat to her right, one of the few familiar faces that didn't look like they'd already made up their minds. Jennifer Walsh was on the video conference screen, calling in from the West Coast office. The rest were investors, major shareholders, and senior executives who had watched the company's stock fluctuate wildly over the past week. Richard Brennan, the board chairman and largest single shareholder, tapped his pen against his leather portfolio. He was a man in his 60s who had built his fortune on aggressive acquisitions and had zero patience for sentiment. Ms. Bennett, let's cut to the chase, Brennan said. You went to Tokyo with $1 billion deal practically signed. You came back empty-handed. Atlas Dynamics is now positioned to take the partnership we should have locked down. Our stock has dropped 4%. Investors are asking questions we can't answer. Give me one reason why we shouldn't replace you immediately. Claire took a breath. The old version of herself would have launched into defensive arguments, would have blamed circumstances or her team or anything except her own choices. But Tokyo had changed something fundamental. You're right, she said simply. I went to Tokyo with the wrong approach. I was arrogant. I dismissed cultural concerns as inconveniences. I treated a potential partner like an acquisition target. And I nearly destroyed our chances at the most important partnership this company has ever pursued. The room went silent. Admitting failure wasn't part of the playbook. However, Claire continued, I also learned something crucial. We've been winning deals by being the most aggressive, the fastest, the most financially attractive option. But we've been building relationships that don't last. How many partners have we had to replace in the past 5 years because the relationship soured? How many integrations have failed because we didn't understand the companies we acquired? That's business, Brennan said dismissively. You move fast, you take risks, some things work and some don't. It doesn't have to be that way, Claire countered. What if we could build partnerships that lasted decades instead of quarters? What if we could create value through trust instead of just through contracts? Another board member, Patricia Holmes, a sharp woman who ran a private equity fund, spoke up. That's a lovely philosophy, Claire. But philosophy doesn't show up on balance sheets. What's the actual status of the Sakura deal? I don't know yet, Claire admitted. They're making their decision today. But regardless of what they choose, I learned something more valuable than one deal. I learned how to build sustainable relationships. And I found someone who can teach this entire company to do the same. She pulled up Daniel's file on the screen, his credentials, his experience, his language capabilities. This is Daniel Carter. Some of you know him as a driver, but he's actually one of the most skilled cultural negotiators I've ever encountered. He speaks 9 languages fluently. He has years of experience in international mediation, and he's the reason we still have any chance at all with Sakura. A driver? Brennan's voice dripped with skepticism. You're asking us to trust a driver to save a billion-dollar deal? I'm asking you to trust someone who understands that business is ultimately about people, not just profits, Claire said. And I'm proposing we create a new executive position, Chief Cultural and Linguistic Strategist, with Daniel in that role. Someone who can prevent us from making the mistakes I made in Tokyo over and over again in every market we enter. Marcus spoke up for the first time. For what it's worth, I've reviewed the communication logs from Tokyo. Every positive development came after Daniel got involved. Every door that reopened happened because of relationships he built. Claire may have stumbled initially, but she was smart enough to recognize talent when she saw it and humble enough to step aside and let him work. Humble? Brennan laughed harshly. Claire, Bennett doesn't do humble. I didn't, Claire said quietly. But I'm learning. And if you give me the chance, I'll teach this whole company to do better. Patricia leaned forward. Let's say we don't replace you today. What happens if Sakura chooses Atlas instead of us? What then? Then we learn from it and move forward, Claire said. But we do it with integrity. We do it by building the kind of company that partners actually want to work with, not just the kind that offers the most money. Brennan shook his head. This is too risky. We need certainty, not philosophy. With respect, Richard, Jennifer's voice came through the speakers. Certainty is an illusion in international business. But trust isn't. And what Claire is proposing, building relationships based on respect and cultural understanding, that's not risky. What's risky is continuing to do business the way we always have and expecting different results. The debate continued for another hour. Some board members were swayed by Claire's honesty. Others saw only failure and wanted fresh leadership. Finally, Brennan called for a vote. All in favor of removing Claire Bennett as CEO? Raise your hand. 4 hands went up, then a 5th slowly. All opposed? 7 hands. Marcus, Jennifer on the screen, Patricia, and 4 others who had been quiet through most of the meeting. Brennan's jaw tightened. The motion fails. Ms. Bennett, you keep your position. For now. But understand this. If the Sakura deal falls through, we're having this conversation again. And next time, the vote might go differently. Claire nodded. Understood. Thank you. As the board members filed out, Marcus approached her. That was either very brave or very stupid. Maybe both, Claire said, checking her phone. Still no word from Daniel. You really think he can transform how we do business? I think if we don't learn what he has to teach us, we'll keep making the same mistakes until they finally destroy us, Claire said. The question is whether we get the chance. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Just 2 words, call me. Claire stepped into an empty conference room and dialed Daniel's number with shaking hands. He answered on the first ring. How did it go? Daniel asked. I still have my job. Barely. How'd it go there? Daniel's pause felt like an eternity. Then, we need to talk in person. Can you get on a video call with better connection? I want you to see something. 5 minutes later, Claire was on a secure video conference. Daniel's face appeared on screen, and behind him, she could see the familiar interior of the Sakura Technologies headquarters. Claire, I want you to meet some people, Daniel said, stepping aside. CEO Takahashi appeared on screen, flanked by Ms. Sato and the full board. Claire's heart hammered her chest. Ms. Bennett, Takahashi said formally, we have made our decision regarding the partnership proposal. Claire braced herself for rejection. We have decided to move forward with Bennett Industries, Takahashi continued, but with conditions that are not negotiable. Claire exhaled shakily. What conditions? Ms. Sato spoke next. First, we require the creation of a cultural continuity council with representatives from both companies. This council will have authority to review any decision that impacts company culture, employment practices, or heritage preservation. Their approval will be required for major changes. Agreed, Claire said immediately. Second, Takahashi continued, we require that Daniel Carter be appointed to a senior executive position with authority over all cultural and international partnerships. His role must include veto power over decisions that violate the principles of respect and integrity we've discussed. Already done, Claire said. I proposed exactly that position to my board this morning. Chief Cultural and Linguistic Strategist, reporting directly to me with full executive authority. Takahashi's expression softened slightly. Third, we require a 25-year heritage protection clause. Our company name, our founding principles, our employment practices, these cannot be altered without supermajority approval from both boards and the Cultural Continuity Council. We will not allow this partnership to erase who we are. Claire understood what they were really asking, proof that this wasn't an acquisition in disguise. I'll have our legal team draft language that gives you those protections with full transparency and public accountability. If we violate them, you have the right to terminate the partnership immediately with no penalty. Around the table in Tokyo, the executives exchanged glances. Several nodded. And finally, Ms. Sato said, we ask that you personally commit to learning, not just about Japanese culture, but about all the cultures you engage with. Daniel has agreed to mentor you, but the work must be yours to do. I accept, Claire said. All of it. And thank you for giving me a second chance I didn't deserve. Takahashi stood, and his board stood with him. Ms. Bennett, you did deserve this chance, because you demonstrated something rare in business, the courage to admit you were wrong and the humility to change. That is the foundation of true partnership. He held up a scroll, the same one mentioned in earlier discussions, beautiful calligraphy reading Shinrai, trust. This scroll was created by our founder after the war, Takahashi explained. He believed that trust was the only currency that truly mattered. We present this to partners we believe embody that principle. We would like you to come to Tokyo for a formal ceremony next month, where we will present this to you and to Daniel together. Claire felt tears threatening and didn't bother to hide them. We'd be honored. After the call ended, Claire sat alone in the conference room, overwhelmed by the weight of what had just happened. They hadn't just saved the deal, they had transformed it into something that could actually last. Her phone rang. It was Marcus, Jennifer, and several board members on a conference call. We heard, Marcus said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Congratulations, Claire. You did it. We did it, Claire corrected. And now we have to actually deliver on everything we promised. About that, Patricia Holmes said, I want to propose something. If Daniel's approach worked this well with Sakura, we should apply it to all our international partnerships. I'd like to fund a new department, Cultural Strategy and Global Relations. Daniel heads it, but we build a team around him. Translators, cultural advisors, regional specialists. We make this the new standard for how Bennett Industries does business. Claire felt something shift in her chest. Not just relief, but genuine hope. I'll draft the proposal. Thank you, Patricia. Don't thank me yet, Patricia said. Make it work. Prove that doing business with integrity is just as profitable as doing it with aggression. Then we'll talk. 6 months later, Claire stood in a small ceremony space in Tokyo, surrounded by the people who had taught her what leadership actually meant. The Shinrai scroll hung on the wall behind CEO Takahashi, who stood with Daniel and Claire before him. In our culture, Takahashi said in English, speaking to the assembled guests, board members from both companies, employees, partners, and journalists, we have a word, kizuna. It means bond, connection, the ties that bind people together. This partnership between Sakura Technologies and Bennett Industries is kizuna made manifest. He presented the scroll first to Claire, who accepted it with a bow she had practiced until it was perfect. Ms. Bennett came to us, as many Western executives do, with confidence and ambition. But she left as few do, with wisdom and humility. She is still learning, still growing. That is what makes her worthy of this trust. Then he turned to Daniel. Daniel-san, you came to us as a bridge. You stayed as a teacher. You showed us that language is not just words but understanding, and that respect costs nothing but means everything. You honored us by honoring our culture, our workers, our legacy. For that, we are grateful. As Daniel accepted his scroll, the room burst into applause. Claire noticed tears in Ms. Sato's eyes. Mr. Ito was beaming. Even the stoic Mr. Nakamura looked pleased. After the ceremony, at a modest reception in the tea house where Claire had first learned about patience, she found herself standing with Daniel, looking out at the carefully tended garden. You know what's funny? Claire said quietly. 6 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I thought success was about being the smartest person in the room, the most aggressive, the most willing to do whatever it took to win. And now, Daniel asked, now I know I didn't know anything. Success isn't about winning. It's about building something that lasts. Something that makes other people's lives better, not just your own bank account bigger. Daniel smiled. You're still learning, but you're getting there. I had a good teacher. Claire paused. Back at the office, the cultural strategy department you built, it's already transforming how we work. 3 new international partnerships in 6 months, all built on the model you created. No hostile takeovers. No burned bridges. Just relationships. That's not me, Daniel said. That's you. Finally using your ambition for something constructive instead of destructive. We make a good team, Claire said. We do. Across the garden, Ms. Sato was speaking with a young woman. Her granddaughter, Claire had learned, who was studying materials science. The scholarship fund Bennett and Sakura had created together had funded her education. She held up a prototype, traditional lacquer technique fused with biodegradable composites. Ms. Bennett, the young woman called out, waving excitedly. I wanted you to see. This is what happens when tradition meets innovation. Claire walked over, Daniel beside her. The young woman explained her work in rapid Japanese, which Daniel translated seamlessly. But Claire understood the most important part without translation. The joy on the girl's face, the pride in Ms. Sato's eyes, the evidence that their partnership was creating something real and lasting. That evening, as Claire prepared to return to New York, she received a message from aboard. Patricia Holmes had written it personally. The Sakura partnership is officially our most successful integration to date. Stock price has recovered and exceeded previous highs. More importantly, 3 additional Japanese companies have reached out asking to meet with the American CEO who actually listens. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. The board is watching, and for once, they're impressed. Well done, Claire. Claire showed the message to Daniel at the airport. You did it, he said simply. We did it, she corrected. And we're not done. There's a whole world of companies out there who need to learn that business doesn't have to be warfare. That profit and principles aren't mutually exclusive. That listening is stronger than shouting. Daniel smiled. That genuine smile that had become more frequent over the past months. Then I guess we'd better get to work. As their flight took off, Claire looked out the window at Tokyo disappearing below them. She thought about the woman she had been when she first arrived. Arrogant, dismissive, blind to everything except her own ambition. She thought about the moment when everything had fallen apart, when she'd been forced to choose between her pride and her principles. She had chosen principles, and in doing so, she had found something more valuable than any deal. She had found herself. The scroll from Sakura was carefully packed in her carry-on luggage. Shinrai Trust. It would hang in the Bennett Industries lobby, a reminder to everyone who entered that trust was earned through action, not promised through words. Beside her, Daniel was already reviewing documents for their next negotiation, a potential partnership with a Brazilian manufacturing firm. 9 languages, countless cultures, endless opportunities to build bridges instead of walls. Claire closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of peace. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. But for the first time in her career, she wasn't afraid of the road ahead. She was ready to walk it with humility, with integrity, and with the wisdom that came from finally understanding what leadership actually meant. Not commanding from above, but learning from those around you. Not conquering markets, but building relationships. Not winning at any cost, but succeeding because you made everyone around you stronger. The deal had been saved. But more importantly, so had she. If this story made you think differently about respect, humility, and the hidden extraordinary in the ordinary, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that challenge how we see the world.